Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start things off here, and thank you for filing in. As you see with our schedule, our itinerary here. My name is Evan Schreiber. I'm a K2 News anchor and reporter here in Portland, Oregon. I'm going to start things off with some of the particulars first, and just sort of do the reminder that everyone's been doing, at least for the last 2 years in this pandemic. Just please keep yourselves on mute during this Zoom presentation, and keep your video off. Got a list of presenters here to share their stories. I just want to start by saying I am honored to be here. As far as why I'm here, I think some of the organizers of this saw some of the reporting I've been doing on addiction and recovery issues for K2 News. It started for me in May of 2019. So it's been 3 years now this month. And I remember that first story, writing about the state of addiction here in Oregon specifically. We, at the time, had the 4th highest rate of addiction in the country. We were near the bottom when it came to access to treatment and recovery treatment. This was all according to analysis of the data from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. 3 years later in my reporting, and the state is only getting worse. Plus now we're seeing a rise in overdose deaths and a rise in poisonings. Fake and fatal pills are a problem, and for unsuspecting kids. And that's why so many of you are here tonight. And that's why we're here to show you some of that, how big the problem is. You read it in the tagline for this virtual event. Synthetic opioids, deception, and online access have made the drug scene more dangerous than ever before. So we hope you're here to arm yourself with knowledge about what you can do, how you can get involved, how you can learn from others, how you can share that message with your peers, with your friends, with your loved ones, with your family. And tonight's discussion will center around youth, around kids, around teens, but the fentanyl problem is larger and it's impacting all ages. This is troubling data, to say the least. An analysis of the data from the CDC showing fentanyl overdoses, poisonings have now exceeded motor vehicle accidents for the first time ever. For youth age 15 to 24, people age 15 to 24 as the #1 accidental cause of death. I mean, we're talking about fentanyl poisonings being higher than suicide, higher than homicides, higher than any illness or any other accident. So some of the terminology you're going to hear tonight in this presentation, fake and fatal, what parents and teens need to know. You'll hear that historically these have been called overdoses, but many advocates are calling these deaths poisonings due to the sudden and unexpected nature, plus deceptive practices of the dealer. So you may hear both terms used tonight. The people speaking tonight as a whole want to make you aware of this problem, want you to learn something, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. Whether it's talking about the data, whether it's hearing those personal stories, you will hear it all tonight. I want to thank a few coalitions. I want to start off by thanking a few coalitions for helping host tonight's virtual event here: Community Living Above, NARA Northwest, the Native American Rehabilitation Association of the Northwest, Vibrant Future Coalition helping along with this, Northwest Family Services, Oregon City Together. Thank you to those coalitions helping put on this discussion tonight. I want to thank all of you simply for being here. And as we start this off, it's going to be a difficult topic. It's going to be an important topic. We hope you'll learn something. The event will be recorded. It'll be available after if you want to take a listen along with those resources. And we encourage you to share with everyone you need to. As I said at the beginning, please keep yourselves on mute. Please keep your video off. But we want to make this interactive. If you have questions, if you have comments, please put them in the chat. We can go ahead and answer those at the end when everything is done. We'll get to those resources and a Q&A session there at the very end. I want to start off this presentation tonight with a story specifically about one young man named Cal Epstein, who tragically kickstarted his parents on a journey to not only tell his story, but warn others. And you'll be hearing from them in a moment, but let's go ahead and start off with that video here. It's Cal's story.
Cal had long-term plans. He had short-term plans. In no way did he desire to harm himself. We're certain of that.
He made a mistake. You know, it used to be kids made mistakes and learned from them. With fentanyl, if you make a mistake, you die. I'm Jennifer Epstein, and this is my husband, John. We have lived in Beaverton since 1996 and raised our kids in this area. Our kids went to Cedar Park Middle School as well as Sunset High School.
That's right. Happy birthday, Callie. Callie's eating his birthday breakfast. What do you have for breakfast today, Callie?
I don't know.
Cal, as a young kid, he lived large. He's so cute.
Cal was a fun kid, very much an extrovert.
And how old are you? 32.
He liked to distinguish himself from others. He liked to have a brighter jacket or a different hat. He liked to stand out. He did t-ball, he did kick and chase soccer, he did karate and wrestling. He was a great wrestler with the Sunset Youth Wrestling Program. I don't think he ever lost a match. And then basketball, he did that. He was a really good swimmer. He became a lifeguard and then taught swim lessons. He was a great athlete, but that wasn't his love. He moved more towards the theater, performing, and then he actually really enjoyed the backstage, the lights and sound and crew and that sort of work.
He was a kid who brought people together.
Everybody, ready for back three?
He was a kid who always wanted to have people at our house.
Friendship was like one of Cal's superpowers.
He was always looking out for the person who might feel left out and reaching out to them and making sure that they were included. There was one girl who was going through a hard time, and at school every single day he sought her out every morning and gave her a hug because he knew she was going through a hard time. As
we came into senior year, we found some marijuana at the beginning of the year. In our house, we've had lots of talks about drugs, and there was a no tolerance policy, even in the face of normalized marijuana use, legalization, et cetera. And we had, we had a pretty serious, long, and what we thought was a good conversation with Cal about that. There were consequences, and we didn't see any more evidence of marijuana.
Later, senior year, we did discover that Cal was having more problems in terms of anxiety, and then we also discovered he had an eating disorder.
It was sort of around the combination of those things. We're like, wow, this feels a little larger than us and the pediatrician, and Cal wanted to work on these things, and we ended up finding some professional help. And we worked on those things from the early spring through the summer until he left for school. COVID made it harder. Not only were your meetings with your therapist about anxiety on a screen, but Cal was so social, and COVID really made that part of Cal's life harder. Ultimately, we, together with Cal and his therapist and professionals, decided going to college could be, this feels like a good path. So we were really looking forward to Cal being home for Christmas. He came home on a Thursday in mid-December and was going to be home through mid-January. On Monday morning, we checked on Cal and we found him unresponsive, and we started CPR and we called the paramedics. It wasn't enough. The best we can tell, he sought out some oxy from the street dealer on Snapchat, and I think it could be that he wanted to take some edge off of his anxiety from being home and going to have some parent conversation. It's possible he just was looking to have fun, just a good time. Cal thought he was taking an OxyContin, and he ended up with fentanyl. So now you have cheap fentanyl. That's what these pills are. There is no real pill out there. It doesn't make sense for anyone to sell a real pharmaceutical pill when they can manufacture a fake one. Sell it for the same price and have it cost 100 times less. They're not OxyContin. They're not Percocet. They're not Xanax. They're none of these things. They are fake pills that have inconsistent amounts of deadly fentanyl, and you can't trust any of them. And so the game is completely changed, especially for kids who are going through an experimental phase. An experimental phase is now deadly. If you're experimenting with pills and powders and even vaping marijuana, which I've heard can also have fentanyl, just that one pill can kill.
Even if you didn't know Cal, everybody has a Cal in their life. If we had known better, understood it, we would have talked to our kids differently. And I think that there's still opportunity to save other people. For me, getting the message out, it will never bring Cal back. My son isn't coming back. It is something that in me that I need to do in order for me to move forward, in order for me to know that I've done everything I can to honor Cal, because he didn't deserve this.
Just a quick comment here. I remember seeing that video in April of last year when Jennifer and John first made it available. The journalists in me wanted to tell their story, wanted to learn more, wanted to tell Cal's story. At the time, they declined. They were apprehensive to let people a little bit into their private life, to let me, a reporter, into their private life. They've been so open and open and honest in public since then. They've taken charge. So much has changed. It's a story that can hopefully save and change lives. So with that, I introduce Cal's parents, Jen and John Epstein, to talk a little bit more about the life-saving work they're doing to get this information out there.
Great. Thank you, Evan. Thank you all for being here. That's a hard video for us to watch, and I'm sure a lot of you are feeling it too. And I'm Jennifer, this is John, and we're grateful that you're here because in all the things that we've learned since losing Cal, we just feel like this is a problem that we can help solve by sharing our story. And by making people aware of what is going on, because we believe that, we strongly believe that if Cal had known what was going on, he would have made a better choice. And we think that in general, youth will make better choices if they understand what they're facing. So with that, I want to start by bringing everybody up to date on what is fentanyl, how it's gotten into the drug stream, and how this whole thing got started. So I'm going to start with what is fentanyl. Fentanyl is a powerful synthetic opioid, and it's a drug that is legitimately used for medical purposes and has been around since 1960 or so. And it is generally, the pharmaceutical fentanyl is used in hospitals every day, typically as a pain reliever for people who need very strong pain relief. So end-of-life care, cancer patients, or people going through surgery. It is sometimes prescribed in patches and lozenges, and where it can be very closely monitored, the dosages. It is synthetic, unlike previous generations of opioids like morphine or oxycodone and Percocet, et cetera. It is 100% man-made. Previous generations of pain relievers often rely on a crop that needs to be grown. And so it relies on land, growing seasons, harvesting, et cetera. Whereas fentanyl is 100% man-made, which means that the supply can be ramped up very quickly, and generally it is low cost. It is very powerful. It is one of the most powerful pain relievers that is out there today. And as a result, when it is used in a hospital setting, it is generally administered by anesthesiologists or other medical professionals who are trained specifically on how to monitor the dosages and how to use it safely. And you can see that little picture with the penny with a little bit of powder next to it. That is the equivalent of what it would take to be a fatal dose if you were to get powder fentanyl. So it just takes a tiny bit to create a deadly effect. And because it is very, along with being very powerful, it is very addictive. Next. And so one of the first questions we had was, how did fentanyl get into our son's hands? How does this happen? And in order to really understand how this is becoming available on social media and through the internet, you have to kind of have an understanding of the opioid epidemic. The opioid epidemic started in the 1990s when Purdue Pharma and basically misled doctors into believing that their new drug OxyContin was not addictive, and this led doctors to overprescribe it. They freely prescribed it. Patients liked it. Doctors didn't realize that they were creating a problem of substance use disorder. When doctors when patients were done with their regimen and doctors, were stopping their prescriptions, whenever a patient was done with their prescription, often it was not unusual for people to experience the effects of withdrawal because they were becoming addicted. And a lot of those people went to the street to try to get additional pills because their doctors wouldn't give it to them anymore. And at that time in the 90s, a street market came about. So people who had prescriptions and they weren't using, they would sell that to friends or dealers, sell that over prescribed amount for money, or dealers would rob pharmacies or perhaps even pharmaceutical companies. So in the 90s, you had this illegal street market, but it was of medicine. It was actual pharmaceutical pills that were out there. So, if it said it was oxycodone, 30 milligrams or whatever it was, that's what it was. It was illegal, but it was predictable. Whenever in about the early 2000s, the DEA and other law enforcement agencies really cracked down on this, and they did a really good job of curbing that flow of pharmaceutical drugs on the market, on the street market. And as a result, that's when the heroin epidemic really kicked in, because people could no longer get the legitimate pharmaceuticals. They moved to heroin. Next. So from there, the cartels realized that there was an opportunity for them to make money. They realized there was still a desire to get pills. There was still a market. And so that's when the cartels started creating fake pills. And initially, the fake pills were created by the cartels got fentanyl from China and sent that fentanyl from China to Mexico. In Mexico, the cartels would get the powder that used to make the pills, perhaps some dye, get some pill presses, and they were able to make pills that look almost identical to the legitimate pharmaceuticals. Eventually, the US did put some sanctions on China to stop the flow of fentanyl, but then the cartels just moved to getting the precursor chemicals. They would get the chemicals and have the chemicals shipped to Mexico. They would mix the chemicals along with, again, the pressed powders and the dyes and create the pills. So what ended up happening is in about 2015, plus or minus a couple years, we started seeing pills that were now being sold on the street market. And those pills, not only were they not the drug that they were being advertised as, so it wasn't Oxy, it wasn't Xanax, it wasn't Percocet, instead it was fentanyl. And not only was it not the drug they were asking for, but it was in unpredictable dosages, because the cartels really don't care about what the dosage is. They're just trying to get the pills made and out there. So as a result, today we have a street market that is that has illegal and deadly drugs, and it's supercharged by the social media. Next. So this supply of inconsistent and hidden powerful fentanyl in these pill forms and also in powders has created an absolute tragedy in our country. This is looking at all ages, and we're going to talk about kids in a little bit, but over the last number of years, you can see how drug overdose deaths have skyrocketed to, this chart says 92,000 in a year. The latest numbers are something like 106,000 in a year. And fentanyl, the brightest line there, is really driving that. In this picture, it's 57,000, but out of the latest data of 107,000, it's something like 70,000. So something like 2/3 of all drug overdose and poisoning deaths that are happening today involve fentanyl. Often they involve other substances as well, but if you look at how many of those deaths involve the other substances, you can see that fentanyl almost has more than all the other substances combined. So this unlimited supply that's coming from the move from farm to lab, combined with the deceptive selling of it in pills and the cutting of it into powders and the overall contamination of the street drug market, has just made an absolute tragedy for many, many people. And every one of those people matter deeply. We're going to spend our time today talking about kids, but of course, it's a tragedy for all of these folks. Okay, next. And so this is a page that we actually use often when we're speaking in schools to really get the message across that today's drug landscape is dramatically more dangerous than it was when parents on this call might have been growing up, or even 5 or 6 years ago, because of this inconsistent, powerful dose of fentanyl that's coming in these pills. If you think about it, the whole invention of a pill was intended to give people a confident idea of what is the medicine they're taking and how much of it. And now we have these inconsistent amounts that are mixed by the cartels, and some pills have none, and some pills have 5 times a lethal dose, and you just don't know what you're going to get. So what we tell students, and what all students on the call today and everyone should know, is sort of what a California county uses as part of their public service announcement: expect fentanyl. You could assume that any pill you buy online or you get from a friend is fake and quite possibly deadly. We have someone from the DEA on the call tonight who's going to talk more about that. But it really is the case that there are no seizures of real pharmaceutical pills happening out there today.
it's all fentanyl or some other toxic combination of substances. It's also important to note that fentanyl addiction is a little bit more complicated than semi-synthetic opioids because of how it metabolizes in the fat cells. I believe that's the way it's described. So it's a little more difficult if you do find yourself not overdosing and dying, but needing treatment. There's some complications there as well. And fentanyl is also being found in all these other street drugs, either intentionally, like a cutting agent in heroin, or we're not sure, but maybe an incidental or accidental contamination with things like with marijuana. We don't see that really as being widespread, but there are some reports from time to time about that. So we sort of have that on the watch list. Next.
And this is why we're here tonight, is we want to raise the flag. We want people to be aware of this so that they can have the right conversations with their kids, and so the right conversations can be had in schools. Youth today, and most people today, recognize the danger of powerful street drugs like meth or heroin, etc. And generally, youth will make good choices around staying away from those drugs. Prescription pills, youth are also taught to be aware of prescription pills and the dangers of opioids and other prescription pills. However, we also live in a society where the use of drugs has been normalized. The use of pills has been normalized. If you think about it, over the years, kids are offered pills in many ways. You may have a kid who has ADHD or anxiety, and they're given medication for that. If a teenager goes and get his or her wisdom teeth pulled, they may be offered a prescription of Percocet. You have people that mom or dad or even the child having some injuries or surgery, and they may be given Oxy or Percocet for that. And so kids are often taught, intentionally or not, that pills solve problems. Pills help to take away pain. And what people don't understand, or what kids don't understand today, is that often the pills that, or more likely than not, the pills that are being sold on social media and that are being passed in the hallways are not the Oxy or Xanax or Percocet that they're marketed as, but instead they're a powerful drug that is much, much more powerful than even the heroin or meth or stronger drugs that they would turn away. And unfortunately, traditional drug education in the schools, it does not accurately describe this drug environment. There are some schools, Beaverton School District is the leader and really warning their kids in that. There are some other schools in the area that do provide this education, but most of the schools have not caught up about this. So it's very important that parents talk to their kids, talk to your friends, your neighbors, talk to the people in your community so that this word can get out until the schools can catch up. Next. We, talking about the knowledge gap, as I said, most youth are not aware of this problem. We were able to receive data. There was a company called Morning Consult, a market research firm that surveyed kids in the summer of 2021. And in that survey of 13 to 17-year-olds, what they found was that 86% of those surveyed said that they're overwhelmed. We know that stress is a problem for this generation. This generation has had to deal, with social media and a lot of pressure regarding performance and of course, COVID and the pandemic. And so, this is a generation that is experiencing more stress perhaps than any other generation. Yet almost 3/4 of these kids have never heard of fentanyl and counterfeit pills. So in this survey, these kids were asked to identify drugs that they would call extremely dangerous. And they were correct in naming the, heroin and cocaine as being extremely dangerous. Yet only 27% of the students or of the teens that were surveyed identified as fentanyl as being extremely dangerous. And that was a similar ranking or similar rating as the way they would, what they would call cigarettes or prescription opioids. So they this survey indicated to us that really they don't understand the danger of fentanyl. And unfortunately, they don't understand that these teens and young youth are dying of fentanyl 14 times the rate that they are dying of heroin. So it is much more dangerous, and it is being found in prescription opioids, benzos, and stimulants that they might be asking for via the internet. Next. So because of this, because of the introduction of synthetic opioids, fentanyl, there's becoming a new category, a victim of the opioid epidemic. Pre-synthetic opioids, we would look at the victims of the opioid epidemic, and they tended to be older. And oftentimes they had been fighting substance use disorder for maybe 10, 20, even 30 years with grown or pre-synthetic, the old generation of opioids. People were able to maintain a life longer than with these synthetic opioids. With the introduction of fentanyl, we're seeing a much younger victim, and victims that are opioid naive. They have no idea what they're getting. They're often dying on their first experience with trying with pills, or when they're just still in an experimentation phase. And there's less time for families to intervene. We have many stories of people who have lost their lives, and their families say that they saw no signs. They didn't recognize the traditional signs of addiction. And so on this slide, these are actual kids who have died of fentanyl poisoning within the last 2 years or so. And while their stories may not be exactly the same as Cal's, you will see some similarities. Zach Didier, he was 17 years old. He was a senior in high school. He was the lead in his high school's musical. He had a 4.0. He was a very accomplished and well-liked kid with lots of friends. And he was thinking of, he was going to go to college in the fall, and decided he wanted to experiment with pills before he went off to college. And he and a group of friends got some pills, and his friends survived, but Zach died. Alexander Neville in the middle, he was in 6th grade when he started trying marijuana with a group of friends. He progressed to ordering some pills online. After about a week of taking pills online, he told his parents that the pills got a hold of him. He didn't understand what was going on, and he asked them for help. Within a couple of days, they searched high and low for help, and it took them a couple of days to be able to find a program to check him into. He was supposed to be checked in on Monday, but the weekend before he was able to get checked into the program, he died. So he had 2 weeks of experimentation before it took his life. So these are stories that John and I, unfortunately, are hearing again and again, and they just are an example of the kids who are becoming victims to this epidemic. Next.
In the interest of time, I'm going to take you through these next couple of slides pretty quickly, but these slides and the detail behind them will be in the presentation material that's accessible after the presentation. We just wanted to make sure that we did due diligence to the data associated with this, because we wouldn't expect you to just take our word for it. We've done a lot of research. Jennifer and I work for a nonprofit called Song for Charlie, and we've done a lot of analysis and looked into CDC and other data to understand what's going on. And this graph really just jumps off the page. This is the annual rate of growth in drug overdose deaths from drug overdose and poisoning deaths by age group. So each line represents one 10-year age group. And you can see the rate of growth for our kids was 3 times the rate of the whole population in 2020. And in fact, if you were to break that down further, you'd see that for 14 to 18-year-olds, they grew at a rate of 94%, which is just about doubling in 1 year. And that's the highest rate of growth in death for any 5-year age group ever recorded. So 2020 was a really tragic year for for all Americans affected by drugs, and in particular for kids. Next. These charts, I'm obviously not going to go into the detail on these, but what they show is that youth are disproportionately impacted by fentanyl. We believe that's because of the opioid naive nature of kids and the naive nature of kids and the deceptive nature of these counterfeit pills. In nearly all measures, other than the absolute number of deaths, youth are more affected than all other age groups. So total number of drug deaths growth, rate of fentanyl death growth, percentage of fentanyl involved, all of these things, youth are outpacing all the other age groups by a long shot. And in fact, in the most hard hit places, such as California, many places in California, Arizona, in Portland, in Austin, a number of other cities, we actually see the actual rates of death, or the numbers of death involving fentanyl, are higher for the younger ages than all the other ages. Next. And in Oregon, we're absolutely not immune. In many cases, it's worse here in Oregon than in the rest of the country. We happen to be sitting on this I-5 corridor, which is, you know, a traffic route from the southern border coming straight up. Oregon drug deaths are growing twice as fast as the rest of the United States, 5 times as fast for fentanyl-involved death. And Oregon youth drug deaths for 15 to 24-year-olds are growing way faster in the US. In fact, depending on when you snap the chalk line and look at the data, either ranked number 1 or number 2 nationally in terms of the worst growth in youth death from fentanyl. Youth drug death is outpacing all the other age groups in Oregon. And in the Portland area, where half of the drug deaths happen, we actually see that, that youth are leading all other age groups in actual deaths. Next. Thank you. So a presentation on this would be incomplete without addressing, at least briefly, 2 important topics: naloxone and test strips. Naloxone, also called Narcan, is basically an antidote for an overdose. It works very well. However, it must be administered immediately, and often, due to the powerful nature of fentanyl, multiple doses are needed. And you still would need to call 911 because the effects can wear off. And of course, if you're overdosing, it's impossible to self-administer it. We've been grateful to hear how naloxone is making its way across the state into schools and easy access for all. We strongly recommend, if you have you know, a young person in your house or someone who is experimenting with opioids, that you have Narcan on hand. You can get it at the pharmacy. You can look for it online. It's becoming easier and easier to get. Now, fentanyl test strips is a little bit more complicated. We're not going to go super deep on that here. We certainly have no problems with fentanyl test strips. They've been a very valuable harm reduction tool. We think that, especially for kids, that it's important that they understand the entire story about fentanyl test strips. Namely, they were designed to test urine. They were designed to test urine, and there's been no evidence-based research that shows their reliability on pills. They don't detect all analogs of fentanyl or a number of other synthetic drugs. And because of what's called the chocolate chipping effect, which is due to the bad chemistry and mixing of and pressing of the pills that the cartels are doing, you could have clumps of fentanyl hiding in different parts of a pill. So because of that, if you want to test a pill and be sure, or as sure as you can with the test strip, you need to destroy the entire pill and mix it with the right amount of water and then test that. And then, you know, basically drink it. So the reason we stress this is we think it's important that kids know this, and also importantly, that they know that if anyone is selling them a pill and they say, oh, I've tested this pill, it's actually not true, because you can't test a pill in pill form because of the way the fentanyl exists inside the pill. So our important message for kids, you know, naloxone and test strips are important things. We're not against those in any way, but don't let them give you a false sense of security. You need to know that the only guaranteed safe avenue with pills are those that are prescribed to you by your doctor, and you take them out of the pill bottle yourself, with the pill bottle that has your name on it. Okay, next. Okay, we're just going to wrap up here and then pass it off to the next speaker. A couple of key points. Youth experimentation is common. They self-medicate, and taking of pills is low stigma, it's normal, and it's really easy for them to get their hands on these pills. Second, today's drug landscape is far, far more dangerous than ever before, and youth are being impacted by it like never before. Third, this problem is not going to go away quickly. It's taken many years for it to arrive at the horrific scene where we are today, and if we are able to solve it, it's not going to happen quickly. So in the meantime, it's critical that we raise awareness. There's a gap between the youth perception of harm and the reality of harm. So to fill that gap, we need to warn the kids in every way possible. Lastly, if you find that you or your child need mental health help or substance use help, it can be very challenging to get, especially in Oregon. We recommend you start as soon as possible. You call in all resources, including some we'll provide at the end of this presentation, and don't give up.
Thank you.
Big thank you to Jennifer and John for not only sharing your perspective, but just what you've learned over the last year, at least a year plus. I want to bring Michelle Stroh into this conversation. Before I do, just a quick reminder for anyone who's on the Zoom call right now, who's on this Zoom presentation. If you have any questions that you'd like answered, we will get to those at the end. Please leave them in the chat and we will compile those and make sure they're passed off to the right people. But let's bring in Michelle Stroh, not only able to share her personal story, but her professional story right now as a mother, an advocate, a school board member working to help others stay informed. Michelle, take it away.
Thank you, Evan. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Stroh, and I'm here to tell a story about a boy named Keaton. Keaton was our third child out of 5 children. He was the textbook middle child, surrounded by 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Keaton, like our other children, did sports as soon as they could. He played soccer, classic soccer, track, cross country, and football. He was pretty popular in school, and he had many friends. He was freshman homecoming prince, and he always had a girlfriend. We attended all of his sports functions, all of his school functions, and like any large family, we were constantly on the go. In high school at age 14, 15, I really noticed more withdrawal and more teenager moodiness. After asking Keaton the normal questions, I took him into our pediatrician, the doctor whom we'd had since birth with all of our children. Doc ran the usual drug screens, spoke with Keaton in depth about his moods, and everything came back negative. But something was off and I just couldn't figure it out. After running multiple tests and all negatives, we finally ended up sending Keaton to counseling to see if that would help him. I would find out years later, the reason all the drug screens came back negative, he was taking his friend's Ritalin medication. He was taking Adderall. We didn't test for a prescription, but he was taking a legal pharmaceutical. It just wasn't his. Keaton excelled in sports, but he suffered 3 really bad concussions in football, ending his football career, and then a track injury, and of course, in Keaton Stroh's style, he had a really bad longboard accident, which all of them end up giving him scripts for Oxy. Again, it was a prescription, so I didn't worry. I would find out much later that he loved being on Oxy, and that's when he believed he became addicted to Oxy. After high school, his attitude and his lackluster of any motivation to get a job, his dad and I began to push harder. We found out he was just smoking pot and he couldn't pass a drug screen to get employed. We decided to take the tough love route and said, you'd have to go out and get a job or we're going to have to kick you out to go live elsewhere until you can figure it out. Keaton left the home, came back and announced he'd signed up for the United States Marine Corps. I burst into tears. I was so afraid he was going to get killed going to war. But Keaton made a decision and we were going to support him. Once again, the whole family rallied around him and we all went to boot camp graduation and we celebrated him in Disneyland. He was so good. He had his drive back. He was the only one in our family that had ever been a Marine. He continued to blossom his personality and achieve all of his goals. He was chosen to do a humanitarian deployment way over east. He was so excited to be able to travel the world. He went to Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, Fiji, and Tokyo. I would hear bits and pieces about his adventures, and he seemed in such great spirits. He sent us home photos and lots of funny emails. He came home and I got the military mom surprise of a lifetime. And he also surprised me at his alcohol intake. I asked him gently about his drinking and he said, "Mom, everybody does it." But once again, my mom alarm was going off. Keaton returned back to base and got deep into drinking. And while intoxicated, another fellow asked him if he wanted to do a line of cocaine. And without thinking or hesitation, Keaton did. And that ended his military career. The Marine Corps placed Keaton into their rehab, and once he completed that, he returned home. I often reflect back on his time serving as he was sober and a true version of himself. Keaton took a few months to reacclimate to being a civilian and being home, and then he returned to his previous job. We thought things were going okay, but Keaton got really good at lying and really good at hiding the truth. He had a big breakdown. He begged us to go back to rehab. We did the work, we found a place, and he left for 30 days. I, being new to this, thought he'd be fixed upon graduating rehab. But Keaton continued to smoke pot, and we would not allow it at our house because he had younger siblings. On 12/2 of 18, I couldn't reach Keaton to see if he was going to join the family in our annual Christmas tree hunt. I was getting really frustrated and we were trying to walk out the door when the phone rang. It was Willamette Falls Hospital and we were needed at the ER immediately. They would give me no other information other than it concerned my son, Keaton. We rushed to the hospital and my mind was racing. What could he have done? I don't understand. He just smokes pot. They placed us in this teeny tiny little room. The chaplain came out to discuss the situation. My son was on life support. They had no idea how long he had been down or the amount of brain damage. And at this point, Willamette Falls wanted to transport him to Portland, Providence, because they were much better equipped for this type of situation. When I finally asked about what was the situation and why was he on life support, they informed us that our son had overdosed and was dropped off at the ER. They took his little sister to pick out his death quilt, and they did an honor walk for organ donation. I had no idea what an honor walk was and what the purpose was until a week later. I went in to go see him, and he looked awful. He was blue and swollen, and there were tubes and machines. We rushed to the next hospital where they informed us that they would like to schedule organ donation, and I had said, "What did he take?" And they said his tox screen was positive for cannabis, alcohol, oxy, Xanax, and cocaine. All of his were at lethal levels. They told me my son was not going to make it, and I begged the doctor for 24 hours. Wow. In that 24 hours, my Facebook post went viral around the world, and we were begging for a miracle. I never left my son's side for 5 days, and he woke up. We got the miracle, we got the second chance, and even though the doctor was speechless as to why medically, he said, "If you believe in God, you got your miracle," but that Keaton needed to go to rehab immediately, and he had to get sober. His heart had sustained the most damage and a few other of his internal organs, and his words were messed up. But he was alive, and we packed his bags and sent him to Betty Ford in Palm Springs. This program, we were told, was boosted as the best, and he was doing well. I flew down to attend family therapy, and I learned so much about addiction. I learned boundaries and understanding how an addict thinks. Keaton was down there for 4 months. He was finally kicked out after his third relapse in sober living, and I was so upset with him, I refused to fly him home, and I made him take the Greyhound the long way home. I didn't know it yet, but his roommate at Betty Ford at that time, when he relapsed the first time, he also flew home. He overdosed and he died, and Keaton forever blamed himself for that. I also didn't know I was riding shotgun on the addiction roller coaster. Keaton was on the roller coaster, in rehab, out of rehab, in sober living, relapse, back to rehab. At one rehab family therapy, they told me that if I could write a check for $1 million to cure my son, I would do it in a heartbeat. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. This was all up to Keaton, and his track record for not being successful was growing. Throughout Keaton's addiction, he attended 14 different rehabs, and I know I spent way more than what the counselor said, and I still didn't get to see my son grow old. The family relationship had become so strained under the stress of addiction. Siblings had to create distance, and the hurt from disappointment grew. Boundaries were placed so that we would not be taken down with all of his poor decisions. I had to remember that I didn't cause it, I can't cure it, and I can't change it. This was all on Keaton. He had asked to go back to rehab again. I finally found a 9-month program. We got him in, we packed his bags, and flew him to Huntington Beach. Keaton thrived down there. He completed the half Ironman triathlon, and he was returning back to his true self. He asked to stay down there. Yes, the family all said, stay where you are happy and stay where you are sober. He was trying to transfer his job down there. And then COVID happened. California started closing down everything, including his sober living. We had to fly him home the end of April. As the world went into lockdowns, my fear was exploding. COVID created the perfect storm. No group living, no gyms, no in-person meetings, and the one thing they kept telling us not to do was isolate, and that was exactly what was happening. I watched my son, who was doing great, suddenly slipping down the slope at such a high rate of speed. My daughter's wedding was being held at our home, and Keaton was in such a bad state that we told him he couldn't attend the wedding unless he was sober. He broke down, agreed, and asked my help to detox. We had a beautiful family day. Keaton was such a joy to be around that day. He was so excited to walk me down the aisle, and at the end, he hugged me. He whispered in my ear, "Mama, you will never know how much I love you." And I squeezed him even tighter. And I said, "Keaton, I will always love you more." The world could have stopped extra long at that moment. I didn't want to let go, but it was his sister's wedding. We did family photos, we laughed, and we took it all in. Keaton wrote in his journal about the beauty of being sober to be able to enjoy his sister's wedding, how much he loved his family, and how he had uncle fever. He couldn't wait to be a cool uncle, and that he was going to rebuild his life again, because his life was amazing when he was sober. We spent the following week doing day trips for a staycation honeymoon. His sister and her new husband left on Sunday to begin their new life, and Keaton got really sad. He loved the busy of all the wedding stuff. He loved having the whole family together. Keaton asked me to borrow our car. He wanted to move home, but he had to go gather up all of his belongings. And once again, Mom, he wanted to return back to rehab, and he needed his family. Keaton gathered all of his stuff and came home, and on Monday morning, he got up, made all the calls to rehab, his insurance, and his work. He got everything approved, and he would leave to go back to rehab on Thursday. I asked him to join me at the gym that night. He passed. He wanted to go ride his bike that his big brother had just bought him for his 25th birthday. We both got home at the same time. He said his bike ride was great. He went and rode his bike to see his brothers, and life was good. I said, "Are you sure you're good, buddy?" "Yep," he says with a great big smile. "I'm good. I will see you tomorrow." "I love you, Mama." "I love you too, buddy. And I'm thankful that you are home and you are safe. And I will see you tomorrow." I went to bed and I slept good because Keaton was home, in our home, and he was safe. Tuesday, July 21st of 2020, I went to work as usual. It was a busy daycare day. The sun was out and I lost track of time. At 2:40 in the afternoon, I was like, dang, Keaton is still sleeping in. And I started yelling for him at the bottom of the stairs. There was no answer. I started to walk upstairs and my anxiety and my fear were on hyperdrive. I got to the top of the stairs and I knocked on his door. And I said, "Keaton, you know how much I hate when you don't answer me?" My youngest was right behind me, eagerly waiting for movie day with her big brother. Again, there was no answer. I went to open Keaton's door and his door pushed back on me. My gut knew. And I took a deep breath and I pushed the door open. And Keaton was sitting on his bed. And I was yelling at him, "Why didn't you answer me?" And I went to go touch him and he was so ice cold. And I turned to look at his face. His face was etched in the worst pain, his hand clutching his heart. His jaw was tense and his eyes were clenched tight. All I could do was scream, "Call 911.
I had practiced the situation in my head so many times, and when it came down to it, I couldn't even dial 911. Panic and disbelief took over. I tried to do CPR, but he had been gone for such a long time that there was nothing I could do, and my heart and brain could not process what I was supposed to be doing. The emergency crews arrived. They filled my entire cul-de-sac. All the neighbors were watching. I was trying to make phone calls to my husband, my children, which is the hardest thing to do, and say that Keaton was gone. All I could do was cry. My home was full of so many people, and everything became so overwhelming. I couldn't process anything more. Everything was a blur. My son was dead in my home. He was supposed to be safe here. I had Narcan tacked to his wall. The drug task force came and they searched his room to find 2 oxys on his desk. And they tell me, I'm sorry, but your son overdosed. But none of it makes sense to me because this was nothing like his overdose. Nothing like his overdose at all. All I could think was his heart finally gave out due to the continued drug use. Due to COVID, I have to wait almost 19 weeks for his autopsy to be complete and the death investigation. The medical examiner calls me to inform me that Keaton had 0 oxy in his system. I could not understand, so I reminded him that the drug task force found 2 other oxys on his desk. The medical examiner continued to explain that Keaton's pill was fentanyl and carfentanil. Carfentanil was so potent that it's not even approved for human consumption. 2 milligrams will put down and kill an elephant. Keaton at 130 pounds didn't stand a chance. The levels were so lethal that Keaton was instantly killed and was in full cardiac arrest. I had no idea what either of those drugs were. The drug task force told me they found oxy. I was then informed of the fake pill epidemic and how they were meant to look like the oxys, but they were truly fentanyl. The other 2 pills were the same, so it didn't matter which ones Keaton would have took, he would have been killed from them. They were told that these were the best fakes that Clackamas County had seen, along with the fake pills being circulated in our area. Keaton had enough in him from 1 pill to kill 14 people. The investigation has shown that Keaton was on his bike ride that Monday night and he ran into a friend who gave him 3 blue M30s, the fake oxys, to take the edge off of his withdrawals. Keaton knew that 1 pill would not kill him. He was going to rebuild his life and he was going to go back to rehab. But in fact, he was killed and he was killed instantly. I stepped up to share the story of my boy Keaton because even though he struggled with addiction, he would tell you that he had a great childhood. He loved his family. He just really liked that feeling when he was high, and he thought he can control his addiction until suddenly the addiction controlled him. My son is gone, and I can't bring him back. I am sharing to help save others so they don't have to go through this tragedy. My son took pills from a friend, someone he trusted. He took just 1, and he died. Our family will never be the same. Thank you.
Michelle, thank you. Thank you, as always, for sharing your story. Commend you for being so open about it too, and telling us a little bit about Keaton. I want to move on to Dr. Anna Hildy is our next presenter here in this presentation tonight. She's a child and adolescent psychiatrist. Can offer both a professional and a personal experience in this, talking about the science and data behind the discussion. And as you can see on your screen in this fake and fatal presentation, what parents and teens need to know, talking about brain behavior and collaboration. Dr. Hildy, take it away.
Thank you, Evan. Appreciate the introduction. And I just want to take a moment to just honor the presenters before us and sharing just really profound stories of loss. And thank you. It's really an honor for me to be here and to have this opportunity. As Evan said, my name's Anna. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I work at NARA, which is the Native American Rehabilitation Association. And I work with, I guess, my primary kind of focus, or what I have focused on, is working with youth that struggle with both substance use and mental health. And And really the way that I kind of look at, there are experimentation phases with adolescents, but most of the people that I end up treating, my experience has been that they're using substances as a way to feel better or different or not feel things that they don't want to feel. I just want to say that I'm so glad that there are so many people on this and paying attention, and that we really are, this is a crisis. And there's been a wave, and I think people have been seeing this first on the East Coast and down in California, but it has hit here in Oregon. And young people are going to keep dying until we do something different. And this is part of doing something different. I'm pretty passionate about this. I'm also an individual in long-term recovery, and I struggled with opiate use, with heroin, and fentanyl wasn't a reality when I was using, and this is a totally different beast. This is different, and we need to be letting people know that it's different. What I will say is that about 6 months ago, I started in our residential program, I started to notice that some of the young people were coming in and they were talking about using blues and M30s, and I didn't know what they were talking about. And over the past 6 months, and I would say over the past, really into this year, I would say there's been about a 50% increase in the number of youth that are coming in specifically saying that they're using fentanyl and those substances, which are these fake and fatal pills. Next slide. So I have some objectives that I wanted to go through, and really I just want people to understand how the teen brain differs, and that really can drive behavior and risk. We're going to kind of think about what's been happening over the past couple of years, and that really has severely impacted our young people. And then what I hope is to pass on some tips and skills for parents to engage with their teens, and just kind of touch on social media. Next. So I want to talk a little bit about biology and brain development. And there's a little, here's this picture of the teen brain, right? And so we see this, disorganized, all these pieces, stress, and phone addiction, right? And it's a joke, but the truth is that the teen brain is different. And some of the things that we see and that we joke about, there is a reality behind it. And so the teen brain is different than a child brain and an adult brain. And when we know that from MRI data, we've seen the differences. And so the teenage brain is actually much bigger. There's a lot of neuronal development that's taking place and a lot of pruning. So there's these neurons that are developing and some are being pulled back. And what we've learned is that makes people more vulnerable to stress because of those active developmental changes. So when we talk about young people seeming to be in a lot of stress, or maybe not being able to manage that stress, there is something to that because of their biology and their brains. Next slide. So along those lines, there are, and I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but this is a schematic of a brain. And you can see there's a portion down here that we call the amygdala. And so what actually happens during adolescence is that the amygdala, which is our emotion center, it's kind of a reactive space. It's that fight or flight kind of trauma center that develops much faster than the portion of our brain that's here in the prefrontal and frontal cortex, which is our planning place, where there's judgment. The frontal cortex controls reasoning, impulse control. And so what this means is that during adolescence, someone is more likely to be impulsive, to engage in risky behavior. They're going to misread or misinterpret social cues. And then they're on the opposite end, they're less likely to think before they act, to pause, to change their behavior, and even to be able to learn from prior behavior. They can, but it's more difficult. And so what you have is this situation where there's a high reward seeking and risk taking in a setting of poor impulse control. So again, setting someone up for a bit more risk. Next slide. And so in addition, this is a schematic showing dopamine and dopamine pathways. And so if you don't know, dopamine is one of the neurotransmitters in the brain, and it's that pleasure. It's really about pleasure. So when we do something pleasurable, you get this zap of dopamine and it feels good. And it's really about survival, right? And so eating a good meal, a good dessert, chocolate, dopamine surge, sexual activity, dopamine surge, using illicit substances, dopamine surge. But what's happening, and it's very interesting, is that during adolescence, dopamine is actually more robust in the brain than at any other time. So the way that I think about it is it's actually more potent. So when you have that response, it's going to feel more intense as a teenager and adolescence than it does necessarily with an adult brain. And what I do want to say is that what we do know is when I talk about adolescence or brain development, we actually know that the brain continues to develop really through the age 24 or 25. And so I'm sort of thinking about when I'm talking about these pieces. Next slide. So along with that, right? So we have biology, we have brain development. We also have the psychosocial development. And so as we're growing and developing, we go through stages, right? And you see this in your children, or and so there's this phase that takes place during adolescence, and there's one person who put out some theories, and their name was Erickson, that really I think has a good lock on this, and that's this idea of identity versus role confusion. And so what do I mean by that? And so really, in this period of adolescence, it's when young people are trying to figure out who am I? What's my place? How do I fit in? What are my parents' expectations? What are my expectations? How do I make right choices, right? There's all these, it's just swirling about. And that's what they're supposed to be doing, right? They're individuating, they're figuring themselves out. And so it's really this time of experimentation. And honestly, when peer relationships become primary, and there actually is some studies, actually there was a study that just came out recently looking at MRIs and how young children are attuned to a mother's voice, and that attunement changes in adolescence. And so it becomes less connected, and it's really about that growing up and individuating, and that you're not kind of still with your family. And so that's what's happening, right? And it is this time of experimentation. Next slide. So, and you've heard this before, right? So it really has been this perfect storm when I think about over the past 2 to 3 years of what our young people have been dealing with COVID. And there's just been this incredible increase in anxiety and stress, which was already there anyway. I think there has also been somewhat of an existential crisis for young people. There are lots of things happening in the world, thinking about the environment, thinking about what is the world that has been left to them. And I think that there is a lot of disillusionment. And so the pandemic has just added to that. And as I said before, teens are already more vulnerable to that stress. And then what you've heard some people talk about is this social isolation. And sort of how I always see things is that addiction is really about isolation, and recovery is often about community and connection. And there's a lot of things with that, right? And so when people feel disconnected, that often leads to depression, to anxiety. And so we had, that happened. Our world shut down. And on top of that, as I kind of was explaining in terms of the normal developmental trajectory, during this time frame when young people should be out with their peers and exploring and engaging, they're locked at home with their parents. And that's exactly the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing really developmentally. And I do think that there's been a lot of grief that has occurred. And so all that's just been swirling about. And I think that that has led to people not liking how they feel and trying to feel different. Next slide. So how do we engage? How do we have these conversations? It's just hard, right? These are just hard topics. So I'm going to share a little bit about kind of the approach that I take. And again, it's a little bit different for me, like thinking about being a physician and working with a client or a patient. But I'm also a mother. And so I do, but I think that there are pieces that may help you. So I always take a very non-judgmental approach. I just want to understand. It's about being curious, trying to understand them. I ask a lot of questions. It's all about questions and really these open-ended questions. What's happening for you right now? What are your struggles? How are things going? What do your friends do? What do you do for what fun? How have you managed over the past couple of years, right? Just exploring that. And kind of what I often talk about, when people are coming to me is that it's a safe space, that I want it to be safe for them to talk about whatever they need to, that nothing's good or bad. It's just about getting it out there and exploring it. And I always want to allow the young people I work with to have a sense of agency. They are individuals, they are growing. My job is to help them be the best versions of themselves. And I think that's the same as a parent, right? And so kind of, on the slide, what I talk about educating, right? So of course, you're going to set limits, you're going to educate, you're going to have structure and expectations. But in the mix of that, how do you become collaborative? And I think it's also important to note they have knowledge and understanding. Be open to learning from them. Ask them, right? What is this social media? What are you doing? What are your friends doing? Are people using pills? What pills are they using? What is your understanding? And then I just wanted, I talk about motivational interviewing sometimes, and it's a technique that's been used since the 70s to work with people who are using substances and kind of move them into motivation to change. And it's really about not having any judgment, asking a lot of open-ended questions. But the biggest thing for me is this idea of reflective listening. And I often do this when I work with youth and families. And I do a lot of family therapy in the program I work in. And sometimes I just model that, right? And so it's modeling being and it's really hard. I know that as a parent, you can get into fear and it's what's happening, or is my kid being honest, or how do I manage this, right? And so, but to take a step back and what I say is just being able to reflect, say, I'm working with somebody, I'll use my daughter, Althea, what I hear you saying is that when your mom comes into your room without knocking, it feels, you just feel really frustrated and you feel like you don't have any privacy. Did I get that right? And so having those kinds of, and helping parents to start to ask, and reflect back, and we're using a lot of feeling words. What's the feeling? And then how do we work together? Next slide. So this is just a cartoon that I grabbed, and here's the deal. We call the shots when you're younger. You call the shots when we're old, and everything in between is nonstop battle for control. So my hope is that that's not what happens. Although I'm going to be honest that I have a 9-year-old, and pretty much every morning is a battle for control. So this is not about perfection, right? This is about, but it's trying to learn some skills. And so I'm not going to go over all this just because I want to be cognizant of time, but people can ask me some of these questions. I'm not saying, be loosey-goosey. Don't have any, expectations or limits or set boundaries. That's right. That's our job as parents. And that's what kids need, right? And even adolescents: structure, stability, expectations. So, I think this has come up, well, how do I no illicit substances in the home? That's a hard line. That's okay, right? That is your hard line. That's fine to have that as a hard line. And I think it's totally reasonable, right? Let's say for myself, I'm in recovery. My daughter is going to have, like, that's about safety in the home, right? Maybe there's younger children, but in the mix of that, right? How do you say, listen, we can't have substances in the home. This is about safety. And what I know is that kids are going to experiment. You may experiment. Your friends might experiment. Maybe you're going to drink alcohol. Maybe you're going to try beer. Maybe you might try smoking weed. How can we talk about this, right? Here's my expectation for you at home, but I know that this could happen. Can this be a place? Can we have a conversation about that if it does happen? I want to be able to help you. Let me educate you. And I think Jennifer and John mentioned this too, right? I have this, kids can make, and I shouldn't call it, it's not, you're not kids, but youth and adolescents can make really good decisions about their lives and what they want, but they need the information. And that's exactly what tonight is about, giving them the real, true information. This is what can happen. This is what can happen to you if you are using. You know, I have pretty frank conversations a lot with teens about marijuana, right? About weed. It's not a big deal. I don't like why it's natural or it's legal. Okay, it is legal for people that are not your age. And so it's illegal for you. So there are consequences if you were to use it. I want to also tell you that, there are studies that show that youth who are, in adolescence who use cannabis heavily, it actually impacts their cognitive development. That's information you need to know. Now, I want you to know that because then you can go out and you get to make a decision about what you want things to look like. But you have the information to make, an informed decision. So those are some of the things that that I'll talk about, or I'll try to help parents have conversations about. I also think that most youth can be really pretty good about this, and that but having a conversation beforehand and saying to them, hey, let's have a plan in place. Let's say you're out with friends, you end up at a party, you don't feel comfortable, it doesn't feel safe, there's stuff going on. Let's talk about that. Let's have a safe word that you can text me. I'm going to know if I get that text that you need an out. I can be your out, right? I can send you a text. There's a family emergency. I need to come pick you up. Those are right. But you can have that collaboration with your child, right? You can talk about how do we manage these things? How do we do it together? How do we stay connected? How do we communicate? Let's go to the next slide. So social media, this is really important. So pretty much everybody all the young people that I am seeing that are coming in that are using illicit, pills, particularly these fake pills, they're purchasing it off of Snapchat. And these are called plugs. People have what they call plugs, and those are essentially their dealers. And I think it's important to know that terminology and have conversations about that. Right. And kind of what I was saying, developmentally, it's about pushing these limits and exerting independence, but we have to balance independence with oversight. And so I just think that, and really, I think this, as parents, we should be monitoring social media from day one. Like I said, I have a 9-year-old. She's in elementary school. She has right? She does some Roblox. That's what happens, right? But she's online that way. So we monitor that and we talk about it and we talk about why. And I really think that that we have to be beginning those conversations early. So it's just an expectation. And in educating, this is why I do this. I'm doing this because it's about your safety. It's about your well-being. I want to trust you. I want you to grow and develop. This is important. And I just want, if you don't know what these icons are, then we can talk about it at a question and answer. But what I would say is, if you have a teen in your life, grab them. Say, hey, tell me what these are. Do you use them? How do you use them? What do you think about them? Let's talk about it. Teach me. Let me understand. Next slide. So there was a lot of information here, but my hope is that, you know, what you get out of this is that there is a lot we can do, right? That we're not powerless, and we have action, and we have knowledge. And so as a young person, you know, first of all, take care of your mental health and overall wellness. It's vital. Your stress is real but there are healthy ways to cope, and there are places to go and people to see that can help you with that. Educate yourself about today's drug landscape. Don't let yourself be duped. And, you know, educate your friends. Only take medication that has been prescribed to you or that you've obtained from a pharmacy. Talk about fentanyl and fake pills with your friends. Let's have conversations. And if needed, really ask a trusted adult for help, and sooner rather than later. Next slide. So parents, what can you do? So assume that this could happen to your family, right? This is a reality. This is happening. It's likely going to get worse. And I don't say that because I want it to, but we need to make it get better. Educate yourself on the current drug landscape and talk to your kids about it. Listen to your kids, acknowledge their mental health struggles. You know, this is real, this is happening. Keep an eye on your kids' social media accounts, spread awareness on social media. Ask your schools to educate their students and communities on the changing drug landscape. And if you suspect an issue you can't handle, get help. I think that is it for me.
Dr. Hildy, thank you. The resources you shared were incredible, and we appreciate you you running through those and describing some of the conversations that could be had. I want to continue the conversation of fentanyl and bring in Cam Strom, the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the DEA, to talk about the update on the fight against fentanyl and those bringing it into Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. Cam, you can correct me if I'm wrong as you unmute yourself and bring yourself up on video. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you're the top official residing in the Portland field office. So I don't think there's anybody better suited to share their perspective. So Cam Strom, please.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this panel. Listening to the stories and the information before me is inspiring, as is the continued effort to bring to light substance use disorder and the perils of opioid use, especially fentanyl. As many of you know, DEA's mission is to keep communities safe and healthy, protect them from harm, violence, and overdoses driven by criminal drug networks. And fentanyl is a top priority for DEA. In September 2021, DEA issued a public safety alert nationwide, warning the public of the dramatic increase in deadly fake pills containing fentanyl. And it has been said before me, that alert included 3 very important messages for everyone. Never take pills or medicine that wasn't prescribed to you by your doctor and dispensed by a licensed pharmacist. Talk to your family, friends, and loved ones about the dangers of drugs purchased online, and spread the word that one pill can kill. Fentanyl is being seized in Oregon and in every community throughout the United States. The chemicals are being shipped from China and India to Mexico. In Mexico, drug cartels are mixing the chemicals together in clandestine laboratories with no quality control by persons with little or no experience. The criminal organizations are pressing the mixtures into tablets, pills, to make them look like legitimate pills that you would get from a pharmacist with a prescription. And while they may look similar, they're so crudely made and laced with fentanyl that there's no way of knowing how deadly they are. DEA laboratories have tested numerous exhibits and have found that 4 out of 10 pills may contain a lethal dose of fentanyl, which is about 2 milligrams, or the equivalent of 10 to 20 grains of salt. Fentanyl, the amount of fentanyl that the cartels is putting into the fake pills is increasing. It's being done to drive addiction and profit for the organizations. And it's likely the reason we're seeing more overdoses and more fatal overdoses. In the 12-month period ending in November of 2021, more than 106 people died from overdoses in the US. 2/3 of those deaths are from synthetic opioids, mostly fentanyl. Every day, more than 290 people are dying from an overdose, which is 1 every 5 minutes. Fake pills containing fentanyl are flooding into the US from Mexico to Main Street. Here in Oregon, they're using Interstate 5 as the primary corridor to transport the poison. Once in the state, city, or community, the potential lethal doses are being distributed by unscrupulous members of transnational criminal organizations who prey on those affected by substance use disorders or those who are opioid naive and unaware of the risk of fentanyl. The organizations have also found using social media as an effective platform to advertise and sell fake pills. From 2019 to 2021, the amount of fentanyl seized by DEA in Oregon has increased more than 1,800%. DEA is working every day to seize fentanyl and to identify, arrest, and to bring to justice those drug traffickers and organizations that are responsible. DEA and our law enforcement partners at the city, county, state, and federal level continue our concerted effort through enforcement to address this threat. Enforcement is an important element, but we also need community leaders, educators, and treatment providers working in concert to continue to have an impact and protect those in our community. Events like tonight bring together the expertise and passion from numerous subject matter experts and those who have suffered the loss of a loved one, which is the formula for having the greatest impact in our community to protect our most vulnerable. And with that, I would open it up to Evan.
Cam, thank you. You mentioned the number, about 290 people dying each day from an overdose in the United States. Fentanyl driving this killer crisis. It was your colleague who talked to me in a story for K2 saying that that's the equivalent of a 737 aircraft crashing every day and killing everybody on board. And he posed the question to me, if that were to happen every day, what would we be doing about it? So these campaigns are out there, these warnings are out there, presentations like what you heard tonight are out there. You see a list of resources on your screen. We are going to post this. You will be able to find it. You see the logo, the copyright at the bottom left and the logo at the bottom right of Song for Charlie, a great resource, songforcharlie.org. It has connections to all these resources you see on your screen. But if you're just wanting to get started tonight, doing your research, checking your resources, take a photo of this, take a screenshot of this page and start educating yourself, start sharing some of these things with your friends, with your peers, with your loved ones, to get the word out there as quickly as possible. Want to thank our presenters once again. Want to encourage you to check out these resources. Want to thank our coalition partners once again with all of this. Community Living Above, the Native American Rehabilitation Association of the Northwest, the Vibrant Future Coalition, Northwest Family Services, Oregon City Together. We promised we would open it up for questions. So thank you to those who stuck around, who asked some things that were on your mind. So I want to bring in Michelle Stroh. Michelle, I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, but this might be a good conversation for you because you as a district board member just went through this with the Oregon City School District about getting Narcan into your schools. So Angela Billman asked this tonight, is there a place for schools to obtain Narcan at cost? Angela says, as a school nurse, I'm aware I can pay out of pocket at a local pharmacy, but I'm wondering if there's another source. So Michelle, I'll pose that to you if you wouldn't mind. Is there a place for schools to obtain Narcan at cost?
Yeah, so currently I'm working with Need for Narcan. That's NEED, the number 4, Narcan. We have a Facebook page, and we are working with Emergent Biosolutions, and they are actually giving free doses to school districts. There's an application process, but hit us up on that Need for Narcan page, and we'll get you directed.
Michelle, thank you. Let's see. John, I want to bring you in maybe for this because you kind of responded in the chat, but for those who didn't see it, Saida was asking, as a teenager in high school, how can I convince my friends that trying these drugs aren't worth it?
I'll give it a stab, Evan, but there's probably some other experts online. First of all, I just want to say to Sita and all the other students that are here tonight, thank you for coming. It's very courageous of you and very inquisitive of you to come and learn about this topic. And to be feeling that way about your friends, I think speaks volumes about you. And I think it's wonderful that you'd like to encourage them to not use substances. I do think that, just like for adults, we sort of have come to learn that just telling people not to do something maybe isn't always the best strategy. So my idea was to tell your friends how you feel about them using substances, in particular, if you're concerned for their safety. And also, if you have the space to reach out and ask why they want to do that, and maybe understand if there's something deeper going on there that you might be able to support them yourself or help them to find help if it's something that's a little bit over your head. Dr. Hildy, would you add anything to that?
That I was just shaking my head. That was so beautiful. I think that I love the idea exactly of sharing how it makes you feel, right? If you're a friend, like, it's really scary to me when you are using these substances. Like, I know that people can die. I don't want you to die. I really care about you. But I also understand, like, if you are, like, can we figure out how to get you help? Or is there somebody that I can connect you to? Or I want to make sure that you're getting taken care of. So I would just reiterate exactly what you said, that, but I think it's powerful coming from another youth, right? That peer-to-peer connection and letting someone know that you care about them and that this is really scary. It really is scary.
I think there was one more question that I wanted to get in here from John Durkin, who posed this statement just saying that John is a Christian youth minister that works with teens. My students watch endless videos. Is there any video or series that you would recommend for teens? John mentioned the dramatized series Dope Sick on Hulu, which, again, a dramatized series here, but explores the pharmaceutical involvement contributing to the opioid crisis over the years. Does anyone want to jump in with other perspectives, whether they be documentaries, dramatized stories, anything that was able to capture sort of some of the conversations and some of the issues that we talked about tonight?
Evan, I can offer on Song for Charlie, there's a number of videos, youth impact, the story of the fentanyl pills for a college and upper high school age audience. They're sort of tragedy filled and somewhat educational, like tonight. They may be helpful as a teaching resource to have a lesson. They're not really a longer set series, and I don't know of one that would be perfect for that. I mean, I was going to say, well, give them Ted Lasso and something positive to reflect on and talk about the protective factors more than the risk factors. But I'm sure you have some stuff in that space too. So
if we can, and I know we're monitoring the slides that were presented, can we pull up the resources page and just maybe close our presentation on that tonight, so people can check out those resources once again, and also pull up the contact information for everyone who spoke tonight. If you want to reach out individually, if you have those questions that you didn't get a chance to ask tonight, that you wanted to go ahead and reach out and talk to everyone who you heard from tonight, whether that was Dr. Anna Hildy speaking on the impact on youth, how to talk to kids about social media, whether it was Michelle sharing her son Keaton's story, Michelle Stroh, whether it was Jen and John Epstein sharing what's happening with the fentanyl crisis, and the impact that they have made in the community, sharing their son Cal's story, or whether you want to speak with Cam Strom to talk about the fight against fentanyl that the DEA is making, and those strides that the DEA is making. You see those email addresses up there, and all the community partners. And with that, if as we sign off, we hope you'll take advantage of the openness that everyone spoke with here tonight, the communication that they have, sharing their email addresses to get in touch with them and take advantage of asking those questions and spreading the word here tonight. And with that, I just want to say, just in closing, thank you to everyone who spoke. Thank you to everyone who participated in asking those questions tonight. Thank you to the coalitions who were all involved. And please, 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 if we can pull up that resources slide one more time, do your research on this, spread the word, and we thank you for sticking with us with this presentation.
And thank you to Evan for your help. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.